If you've been following this channel, you know we have been involved in a challenge to get your glucose levels down and your A1c down into the 5s. And I believed and still do believe that most people can do that in 6 months or less if they will be diligent in making the necessary lifestyle changes and especially the dietary changes. Exercise is good, and there are some supplements you might want to take that could help some. But ultimately, it is a dietary change that's going to give you the victory. That is the big weapon in your arsenal of weapons against diabetes. And I thought it was time to talk to people about what happens after you get into the 5. So in a way, I'm making this for our challengees, the people that participated in the challenge. But all of you that watch this channel, you're either watching from a place of victory, you've seen it already, or you're wanting to see that victory, whether you entered the challenge or not. So let's just talk about what about when you get there, when you get into the 5s or wherever it is you want to be, and you say, I've made it. Thank God I am there. I was high. I was diabetic. Now my numbers are not diabetic. I'm feeling better. Many of the complications have receded or gone away entirely. I'm just doing so much better. What now, though? And we've talked about a phase 1 and a phase 2 approach. Phase 1 is where you're incredibly strict on yourself and just really, really serious about limiting the carbohydrates in your diet. And phase 2 is where you let up on the gas a little bit, but not too much. And that's what we want to emphasize. But since we're near the end of this challenge, we started February 1. It is coming close to the end of July. And that is when the challenge will be officially over for those that started February 1. And let's just say if you made it into the 5s, and I know many, many of you did, what do you do now? How do you ease into and transition into phase 2? Well, let me just give you a few suggestions that may be useful to you. One of the big ones you can transition into and make a few modifications has to do with your window of eating. I find it interesting. A lot of people who beat diabetes, and I hear their stories, they tell me they went to OMAD, and the reason I find that interesting is I don't normally push OMAD. I know it's incredibly helpful and it's probably about the fastest way to beat diabetes, but I just don't push it because it is so rigorous and somewhat severe. A lot of people would get turned off if I even mentioned eating one meal a day, and that's what OMAD is, OMAD, 1 meal a day. So I don't normally mention it much, but when we have testimonies and people tell their stories, a lot of them tell me I went to OMAD, even though I didn't really push it. So if you have been on OMAD, then one transition you can make is to go to 2MAD. Instead of eating 1 meal a day, you can eat 2, separated by some hours. So if you could do a 4-hour window of eating, maybe have your first meal at 12, your second meal at 4. Or what I've recommended in this challenge is a 6-hour window of eating. Normally it would be eat your first meal between 12 and 1, your second meal between 6 and 7. Now, I have allowed for bulletproof coffee as a breakfast substitute. So you can go from OMAD to 2MAD. If you've got a window of eating at 4 hours, you could make it 6 or you could make it 8. If you followed the challenge and did it the way I was recommending, which was a 6-hour window of eating, you might want to stretch that to an 8 and squeeze 3 meals in. So you can experiment with your window of eating if you've made it where you want to be. Another modification or change you can make is to incorporate a few of the foods that were considered iffy and you just didn't touch in your phase 1. One example is bean soup. I will eat occasional bean soup. I know some of you are gasping and can't believe it, but I do sometimes. Benedict and I will have bean soup for several days in a row as a lunch. I normally don't like to eat it as a supper, as my evening meal, because it's going to raise your blood sugar a little more than some of these other meals. But when I eat bean soup, it's not just a bowl full of beans. It's got liquid in it. Obviously, if it's a soup, we're not just talking about a bowl of beans. And then it's got some vegetables in it. And so it's not just pure beans. So that's one thing that's going to help. You're not just eating one big old mess of beans. You're having beans plus maybe some celery, plus maybe some sliced carrots, plus maybe some cauliflower, whatever. And so I will do that. You can experiment, see how your glucose meter responds after you have a bowl of beans. Another example, you could throw in a few more berries than you're used to using. So sometimes I'll have berries in my salad. Often I will have berries in my salad. If you make the chia seed pudding, you can put a few berries in that. So you can experiment by adding a few more berries than you did in phase 1 and see how that works for you. If you're desperate to have fruit, and really most of us could do pretty well without fruit, Dr. Richard Bernstein talks about how it's been like decades since he's had fruit. But if you really, really want fruit, you might try something like a clementine, which is like a small orange. Used to talk about tangerines, which are even less sweet than a clementine, but I don't see those in the store much anymore, so I'm not sure if tangerines are popular anymore. But a tangerine, a clementine, clementine is supposed to have about 8 grams of sugar involved. So that's not too bad if you're having other food items that have almost no carbs to them at all. So you might experiment. You may want to give it up altogether. A small tart apple or half of an apple, as long as it's not a super sweet, you could experiment with that and try things out. I don't believe in being heavy-handed and saying, for the rest of my life, I'll never eat this, I'll never eat that, I'll never eat this. There are some things that's exactly how I am and how I feel about them. Potatoes, for one thing. I just don't want potatoes ever. I don't want potatoes now. I don't want them when I'm 75. If I make it to 85, I just don't want to be eating potatoes, except maybe as a YouTube experiment. Rice, pretty much the same way. Bread, normal bread, the same way. Sausage gravy. You've maybe seen me do a video where I went to Waffle House and I ordered their gravy and then I put it on a chaffle. And it works for me. My glucose meter tells me that I don't bump up all that high, even though I know gravy has flour in it. And so it's not the perfect food, but it works for me. And so once in a while, I'll treat myself. And I will have some gravy, and I'll usually order some gravy, and I'll put a small amount on my chaffle, and then I'll go home and I'll have a couple more helpings of gravy to put on some more chaffles. I don't have gravy in biscuits, not a normal biscuit, but I do have it on chaffles. You may want to experiment with some keto breads. Normally, I don't recommend keto bread of any kind when you're in phase 1. Just I know they have their info that says very low in net carbs, but a lot of people say it doesn't work for me, and it's just easier to drop it in phase 1. In phase 2, you may want to experiment. Most stores these days you can buy keto type breads, and there are all kinds of low carb tortillas that you can buy. And a lot of people have said that doesn't work for me, and some don't, and some do for me. So you can experiment. Keep your meter handy. Don't let go of that meter and see how it works for you. During the challenge, I recommended having keto desserts. I wanted you to have keto desserts. Why? So this wouldn't become such a burdensome diet that you just give it up in a hurry. I want you to enjoy your food. I want you to enjoy dessert a couple times a week. Now that you're into phase 2, as you will be at the end of this month of July, you may want to stretch it out. Instead of 2 keto desserts per week, you may want to add a 3rd night or a 4th night, as long as they're smallish and not too big. And your blood sugar meter tells you that it's okay. So some of the rules can be modified, bent a little bit, but not too much. Now, what you don't change would be some of the villains in the metabolic issues. Like, as we mentioned, potatoes, rice, bread, breakfast cereal. Just forget about breakfast cereal. Make some chia seed pudding, or take some coconut flakes and some almond flakes and a few nuts and maybe a few berries. Throw in some almond milk or some heavy whipping cream diluted with some water, and maybe a couple of packets of stevia or monk fruit or whatever you like, and that can work for you. But the regular cereal, that whole breakfast aisle in every grocery store has an entire aisle just with one breakfast cereal after another. And none of them work, really. There is a keto breakfast cereal that I sometimes will buy. It's very expensive. It's like $7 a box, and maybe higher since the last time I checked. And I will usually use that as a little topping. I don't normally eat that as my entire cereal, but after I put in my almond flakes and my coconut flakes and some nuts and maybe a couple of berries, I will sometimes top it with one of those store-bought keto cereals, but not the regular cereals. So, and then the one thing you really can never change. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you can never really change this, and that is snacking is over for the rest of your life. Not today, not next year, not a dozen years from now. You're done with snacking, period. No snacking, no grazing. That's over. Sayonara, hasta la vista, bye-bye, snacking. Never again. So there's no modification allowed, no changing. If you want to really see the victory for a lifetime, and that's what we want. We don't want to just see the victory in 2022, and then by 2024, we're back in trouble again. That's ridiculous. We want to see it for a lifetime. Now, how do you determine if some of these modifications work? Well, we mentioned before, you check with your glucose meter. You do the post-meal test. Another test that is valuable, that I find quite valuable, is simply test yourself when you wake up in the morning. Because if I'm being a naughty boy, and my idea of naughty is probably not most people because it's still low carb, but when I err on certain things and I'm not really eating quite the way I used to, my fasting glucose will be a tattletale. It will be a warning bell. It will be the canary in the coal mine. It will tell me, hey, the last several weeks, I've been waking up with glucose from 85 to 90. What's going on? I'm at 98 now. I'm at 102 now. What's happening? And I start thinking back to what I've been eating and how my diet has changed. And it can be a real clear warning bell to me that, Dennis, you've made some changes that your body doesn't like too well, and you probably need to go back to the way you used to eat. So your post-meal test will help you figure out if your modifications are working. Your fasting glucose will tell you, and ultimately your A1c. If you were at 5.4 and now you're at 6.3, those modifications are not working for you, my friend, and you better rethink your modification. You better modify those modifications. So your A1c will tell you whether your modifications are working. Your fasting glucose will give you a pretty good idea what you've been doing lately. And, of course, your post-meal test will also tell you a lot. So check yourself. Hold yourself accountable. Did you ever wonder why YouTubers are always asking you to like, share, and comment? It's not really that we're all egotists and we love to have a lot of positive reinforcement. It's because we know that the YouTube algorithm keeps track of these things and rewards videos that have a lot of viewer interaction by promoting them to other people. So when people go to YouTube, they'll find that video near the top of their feed, and in turn, these videos will become more popular still. So if this channel has been a blessing to you, help us out by clicking the thumbs up, making a comment, and sharing it with someone you think might benefit from it. Thank you so much, and God bless you.